Big thanks and hello to James Farmer, Head of Brand and Marketing Communications at the Chartered Institute of Marketing. The CIM is the global professional marketing body with around 30,000 members in 127 countries worldwide. Founded in 1911, the CIM offers training courses and professional qualifications from foundation to postgraduate or master's degree level. They are able to award the highly respected Chartered Marketeer status, recognised by marketers as the highest level in the profession. During the last 5 years, James has headed up the digital comms, content, event and creative team at the CIM. He launched the CIM Marketing Podcast, building the company's audio output, and after only 9 episodes, it became a top 10 marketing podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. He has played an integral role in the revision of the CIM's qualification syllabuses, ensuring all modules reflected the skills required of a modern marketer. And James has created and implemented a new marketing strategy for the CIM, steered a new creative direction for all company comms, which has helped the business exceed its annual revenue targets. So, welcome, James. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat today, and well done on everything you've achieved over the past 5 years.
Thank you.
Today, we're looking at the the past, present, and future of the CIM, and obviously your role within that journey. So, would you like to start us off just by telling us a bit more about the Chartered Institute of Marketing, the CIM, its history, the membership benefits on offer today, such as qualifications and training?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on, first of all. So going back a long way to the 16th of May 1911, 12 individuals met at the Inns Court Hotel in London and created a new professional association called the Sales Managers Association. It was created to improve sales techniques and set the role of sales on a more professional footing. 61, as a result of changes in the industry, the association changed its name to the Institute of Marketing and Sales Management. And then again in 68, the name changed to the Institute of Marketing. And then in 1989, Queen awarded the Institute with a Royal Charter, so therefore becoming the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So actually this Sunday will be 110 years old, which is quite some achievement. Also a challenge in today's fast-moving digital world. So I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And today our mission isn't really much different than it was for those 12 individuals. We strive for businesses and leaders and opinion formers to recognise the positive contribution professional marketing can bring to their organisations, the economy and the wider society, particularly relevant now in terms of sustainability and climate change. So we do that through supporting, developing and representing marketers, organisations and the profession all over the world.
Fantastic. I mean, it's a highly respected organisation, isn't it? It goes without saying within the industry, the recognised body. And I did realise actually when I was doing my research. Obviously, we work with you guys as well, but that the strapline has changed, as you mentioned there, and quite significant really, because as a marketeer, it is often that difficult distinction between when you speak to non-marketers around the sort of sales element, how does sales cross over? But marketing nowadays, as you reference, is so much broader than just any individual discipline on its own. And I guess, when we look at how the company's evolved within that context, really, and how marketing itself has evolved, would you like to talk us a little bit through how it has evolved over the last 100 years, or coming up to 110 years now?
Yes, I mean, I think the naming convention of the association as it was before becoming the institute sort of speaks volumes. It was initially very much sales focused and then broadened as the marketing profession really took hold in the UK to include that broader definition of marketing. So it wasn't just that bottom of funnel activity that it sort of initially set out along that path. To incorporate all facets of marketing and customer centricity and needs-based products and service origination, etc. And specifically for CIM, obviously as we're now called, we started off with just one diploma back in the day, very sort of Mad Men era. And we're now at a place where we've got a suite of qualifications which covers all levels of experience and competence, from level 3, which is our foundation certificate, which are for those new into the industry, all the way up to level 7, which is postgraduate diploma or the equivalent of the master's, as I think you touched on earlier. So, we've expanded our range to incorporate the diversification of needs and skills across the industry. Our membership proposition has come on leaps and bounds, even more so actually in the last 5 to 10 years, really. So we have a chartered CPD program. So CPD obviously isn't unique to us, but actually our CPD program is a pathway to chartered status, which is primarily unique to us. There is another body in Canada actually that can award chartered status, but they can only award it to Canadian marketers. So we are the only institute or the only body able to award chartered marketer status internationally. So that that's a real sort of strong and highly engaged, particularly during these COVID times, program or element of our membership proposition, as well as our mentoring programs. So I think again that's something which has really come to life over the last year and a half, really. There's been that real philanthropic mood, particularly across LinkedIn, where people are sharing jobs, advice, and really just wanting to help out others in the sector. And our mentoring program and the success and people getting involved in that, both from a mentor but also a mentee perspective, is real testament to that. And clearly over the years, the ways of engaging and communicating with audiences has changed more so than any, with the advent of social, etc. But also the sort of advent of webinars and podcasts, and member exclusive webinars are incredibly successful. And that's a new strategy that we've implemented over the last couple of years. We've revised our webinar approach. And that's paying sort of great dividends in terms of the membership proposition. And then our training courses. So back in the day, we didn't have any training courses whatsoever. We're in a position where we have over 100 online and virtual training courses that are constantly evolving to reflect, the latest sort of strategic and tactical elements required to excel in role at the moment. Everything from influencer strategy to B2B social selling. So that's a conveyor belt of courses that's forever moving, and something which wasn't part of our original offering to the industry when we were first formed. And then I guess finally really is that sort of breadth of community. So clearly with time and through sort of relevance, we've built a massive breadth of community now. So we have 9 UK regions, we have 6 international regions, and we have 10 what we call SIGs, so sector interest groups. So they are sort of verticals. So if you also be follow us on social, you can be a SIG member. But if you work in travel or construction or food, drink and agriculture or financial services, we have a sort of a subset group that you can join to have very sort of specific conversations about marketing in that sector or vertical. So it drives real vocational value. So I think all of those are real sort of builds on that original footprint that we had on the industry, and I think hopefully now means that we've got something for everybody.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned a few times there around social, and particularly interesting as well the webinar aspects, because I know post sort of lockdown 1, particularly last year, there was lots and lots of webinars that took place across the industry, almost to the point where a number of people reference now that perhaps it's almost come 360 around the appetite for webinars and so forth. But it's really interesting to hear that in the context of the CIM and the content that you communicate through them, how well attended they are, and actually that you'd seen this as an opportunity before the more recent rise of that as a channel, really. So well done on that.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I think one of the approaches that I think worked really well for us was when the pandemic first hit. Rather than taking the approach of pumping out loads of content, in whether it's print, digital, audio, video, whatever it might be, we actually just sort of sat back for a little while. Not long, but we sat back and just waited for things to unfold a little bit, and for us to get a greater sense of what the market, what our audience wanted, and equally importantly what they didn't want, before then sort of creating our sort of content strategy going forward. That did coincide with, coincidentally, with us reviewing our webinar strategy, which we simplified from a naming convention perspective, but also that sort of burnout of certain types of content, we were very cognizant of. So I think that was something, as I said, an approach that sort of stood us in good stead, and I think our audience respected that, and we've seen a good uptick in engagement with all forms of our content, and also we made a conscious decision to do more sort of asking rather, listening rather than just broadcasting, and I think that's something that generally marketers don't necessarily do enough of. We were quite insight deficient in lots of ways, in the sense that we didn't have many tools in place to keep our finger on the pulse of what people wanted and the changing needs. We were lucky in some regards that we had set up some of those initiatives pre-COVID, and then actually just implemented more new ones throughout the last year or so. So we asked more questions about what type of thing people want to hear more of, what they want to hear less of, what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. We've got a series of surveys in place now, which ensure that we have that constant read, so that we are relevant and adding value. I think that would be a recommendation to anybody watching now.
Fantastic, and it can't be underplayed, really. That approach, it was so tough looking back on it, particularly in the early stages of the pandemic. Looking back to March, April, May, to try and understand what was happening was a very, very difficult thing to do, and continues to be so, because the sort of catching up with the data and what it's showing us. But and so often, I think, and this is my own personal viewpoint, but there's a lot of push messages. There's a lot of messages out there now. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of communication, particularly through channels like social, and a lot of it is sort of push rather than listen and actually respond, particularly, which I can understand is so important when you're a membership organisation, and essentially, you want to serve your members as well as lead your members in a certain way. So, sounds like a great approach.
I think that's one of my bugbears as well, is that it's called social media for a reason, and the originations of social media had nothing to do with business or corporations. So the intrusion, as it was initially, of business into social media channels, wasn't particularly welcomed. So if you're going to be in those areas, you need to. It's a two-way thing. It's a conversation. It's a broadcast channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could get rooted out if you treat it as such.
Yeah. Definitely. And coming on to your role, so you've been there, 5+ years now. And in the introduction, I mentioned all the different areas, all the different teams that you lead and you head. Digital, comms, content, events, creative, and there's also the podcast that we're going to come on to. So it sounds like you have a very full remit. Do you want to talk us through, how your role has sort of evolved, or what its focus has been over the last 5 years, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess initially I was brought on on a 6-month contract role, actually, which then doubled to 12, then doubled to 24 before I went permanent. And I guess so that was quite an interesting story in itself. But initially I was brought on board to create the right internal structure to deliver on commercial objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess somewhat slightly ironically for who we are, our marketing department wasn't really fit for purpose or built for success, I suppose, and future facing. So that was the first sort of task, was to look at what was required to create big comms ultimately, because I came on initially just in a comms capacity. It was later that the brand got added on. So that sort of resulted in a bit of a restructure, nothing significant, but a bit of a restructure, which actually sort of bore a lot of relation to some of the structures which I'd worked in agency side prior to moving to client side. So, I set up almost an account handling team or sort of client service, which is sort of a comms team. But then also created what we call a channel team. So, without wanting to put digital in their job titles, because I'm an advocate of that, created what we call a channel team, which are ultimately the executors of campaigns, and then also the analyzers when they're in field, in play. So you get that reporting back in, so it's sort of a virtuous circle. So in the first instance, it was an internal structural ways of working, milestone processes to ensure that the right people signed off, concepts and asset generation at the right time. So a lot of sort of, I wouldn't say boring, but sort of very essential, but sort of groundwork, I suppose. And also to help us, provide that greater focus on our digital output. Making our social presence a bit more formal and considered and strategic. So a lot of that was initially my focus, and then with that, a new way of us talking to our audiences in a more sort of modern, compelling manner, and it being more benefit-led messaging. So it was very much customer centric, and what's the benefit of doing this rather than what's the product. What does the product do? It's like what will you get out of it? How will it benefit you in your professional capacity? But then my sort of my role, once that was sort of established, then we recruited the right talent to sort of facilitate that process and to sort of guarantee success. My focus then moved more into a sort of brand capacity as well. So whilst there were more functional elements like taking control of the tone of voice and the brand guidelines and being the brand guardian across all of our regions and SIGs and whatnots, it's also about driving relevance. Relevance is a real sort of key word for me. And going back to the 110-year-old, how can a 110-year-old be relevant in the digital world? That's that challenge that I really enjoy getting my teeth stuck into and addressing that through multiple facets, but primarily through content and community and creative, really, I suppose. So, there's a lot of content activity that I focus on now. A lot of new sort of NPD, new product development stuff, as well as partnerships, which is a very much a current focus.
Great, excellent. And you mentioned digital there. It's hard not to talk about digital, and it's all that you referenced there, like the interesting sort of alignment between a very traditional leading organisation within the space with such heritage, and then you bring digital into the conversation. That's the internet's only existed for a certain period of time during the 110 years, and the exponential growth, and also the breadth, how that's impacted the breadth of marketing tactics now that we see within sort of plans and approaches for businesses. How's that influenced? Like, it's a big question, but I suppose on a syllabus perspective or a qualifications perspective, particularly, how has the CIM sort of adapted and continues to adapt to that sort of ever-changing digital world, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we address that on multiple fronts, really. So through our qualifications, which qualifications definitely sit on the shelf longer than training courses. Looking at a shelf life, then a qualification is there, as it should be, because it is a far more robust profound way of learning. You know, over a longer period of time, you cover far more ground, and it's the strategic bedrock that should be there for any, you know, for any sort of professional marketer, really, or if not our qualifications, some other form of, you know, similar, you know, whether it's to what have you, and the way that we address it through that is through a sort of a constant micro evolution of the syllabus, and particularly case studies, and conversations that happen, you know, at a one-to-one level between the tutor and the student around, you know, taking the sort of the established marketing principles and strategic frameworks and applying them and you know, manipulating them so that they're, you know, that they work for today, which is what they always, you know, were intended to be, you know. So I think it happens at a very micro level, but also on a slightly sort of more macro level. Every sort of 3 to 5 years, we do a really thorough overview of the syllabi. We like that word. Plural of syllabus, syllabi. But we do a thorough review of those, and we undertook one of those in 2019, and we draw input on, you know, a wide variety of not only academic sources but also professional, and, you know, those that are out there doing it rather than just sort of teaching it. So, you know, I think that's often an accusation that gets thrown at our qualifications, that they're too academic. They're really not. You know, that is a misconception, and those that have done them, you know, will very much support that. And that really sort of that review results in a lot of evolution across lots of elements. So we created digital pathways. So level 6 used to have, which is the diploma level, has sort of for a while now had just a standard diploma in professional marketing, but also a diploma in professional digital marketing pathway. So that had a duality there within level 6, and we actually rolled that out across level 3 and level 4 as well, so that each level now has that digital pathway. So we sort of acknowledged the need in the market and created new modules that sat within there around digital optimization, the digital customer experience, etc. That then these modules come together to create the overarching qualifications. So a lot of work was done in terms of that, and as I said, on an almost, you know, day-to-day basis, through the tutors that we work with through our accredited study centres, there is that sort of constant updating and making more relevant, or, you know, to the conversations that are going on today in our industry. But then, you know, another element is our training courses. So we've got just over 100 courses now, and we're constantly bringing on board new ones, dropping off old ones that aren't, you know, particularly relevant anymore. So, you know, we're not just stacking them up on top of each other. There's a true evolutionary progression of this, where the sort of the weak die off and the strong survive, and, you know, new things come on. So that's another element that we very much tackle that sort of 110 versus, you know, new age digital conundrum. And then content is our, you know, that is our daily conversation with our, you know, 250,000 social followers. You know, our Exchange content hub is where we work with Lid and other, you know, respected journalists across the industry to push out really sort of engaging articles and blogs, etc. through that. So yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I think, you know, how do you make an establishment that's 110 years old and then in the marketing industry seem relevant to today's world, when you're basically talking about marketing, you're trying to sell in some instances, sell marketing courses and qualifications to marketers. It's a fantastic challenge. It really is.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you referenced there as well the anchor against content and the importance of content at the core of what the CIM does. And, you know, there's such a proliferation of content out there, isn't there? You know, I think the nature of the brand, the CIM brand, and the quality that sits behind that, and everything that goes with that, really stands you in good stead, I suppose, in terms of the the content that you will be pushing out through your different channels. But yeah, it's great to hear that that's a focal part of what you do. And obviously lots of initiatives you talked through there over the past 5 years. What would you suggest has been, the biggest achievement during that time? What's been the main standout for you?
I think it would I always have in my head a sort of a top 5. So if you'll excuse me, I'll quickly race through those. I think number 1 is probably the podcasts. I'm not just saying that because it was my sort of baby, but I think it was just something new and slightly out of our comfort zone that we did, which I think was a real leap forward in terms of our brand and getting across a more personable, light-hearted element of our personality, to the market. I think that's done really well, and it's given us a really nice outlet for talking about big topic, big sort of ticket items, big topics, but in a way which certainly myself and Gemma Butler, who's the marketing director, my boss, that suits our style of sort of more conversational, light-hearted chat. So I think podcast is something which is something that has definitely been up there in terms of achievements. But I think our webinar strategy, as I touched on earlier, I think with the advent of COVID and our regional events being shut down, so each of our 9 regions used to host physical events, across the country. That has had to morph into what we call webinar expresses. So they're not member exclusives. Anyone can attend them, and they're sort of a lot shorter. But in the absence of physical events, to your point earlier, that has resulted in a wealth of webinars. It was a conscious decision, and one that we went into with our eyes very much open. But actually, they've been really, really successful. So delivering those at a regional and SIG level. So I guess the podcast and webinar strategy has been one. But then also our digital badges, which is one of our latest initiatives, is something which I'm really proud of. So we've recently enabled all of our members to we've provided each of our members with digital badges which they can use across LinkedIn, email signatures, put it into digital CVs, etc., to sort of as proof of their membership across their professional network. And I think that's proved to be really successful. Hopefully you've seen some of those been shared.
Yeah.
I must admit there was a period of a couple of weeks where we couldn't see anything but those. So that was that was fantastic to see that. And we're now rolling out the digital badges to our qualification graduates. So that's something that's really nice and something that's really visible. And actually the sort of the UGC that's created off the back of that is really heartwarming to see. And then we amplify that amongst our communities, and it's this sort of snowball effect of community and celebration, which I think in the current climate is really important.
Fantastic. No, really good. And thanks for talking us through that, James. Just in terms of the podcast, I'd like to just ask you another question on this, because fantastic achievement, great quality content, but what really stands out for me is like the following, and referenced in the intro there, very sort of snapshot really around this success that you've had in terms of that listenership. Do you want to just? I know there's a number of people now in our industry who are sort of trying out podcasting, becoming podcasters, and one of the biggest challenges is reach and engagement and building that audience. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about how you have achieved that so far in the CIM podcast?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we so chronologically it came sort of quite at a good time for us, because we had spent the previous year and a half really focusing on our social footprint. So whilst we were present primarily on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, we didn't have a channel specific content strategy for those, and Instagram we it was sort of more behind the scenes stuff, like the sports day that we have at CIM or had at CIM each year. and it wasn't great content, if I'm being brutally honest with myself. So we'd spent a lot of time sort of establishing our presence in social channels, and had done well in terms of building up a strong following in each of those. So we had a very warm audience in that regard that were hungry for content from us. It had to be the right type of content. It had to be, informative, engaging, all the usual sort of things. But we built up, sort of fertile soil, so to speak, so that when our podcast seed, and carry on this analogy, was scattered, it was well received. So I think that was, that wasn't a coincidence, because of the proliferation of podcasts out there, and webinars. We had to ensure that it had stood a fighting chance of success, because you can create fantastic podcasts. If there isn't anyone there to listen to them, then they're wasted. So yeah, so I think initially it was around building the audience, and then it was just a series of lots of planning sessions with Lid, our publishing agency, and ultimately Ben Walker, who hosts our podcasts, who is fantastic. I'm not gonna sing his praises too much, in case he's watching, but lots of discussion with him around the structure of it, the types of topics we would cover, the types of topics we wouldn't cover. Again, importantly, any strategy should very much cover what you're not going to do as much as what you do, what you will do. And then it was this sort of, and I think this was the secret to our success, and the sort of again, this is down to Ben very much, but it's about building in that looseness. So you don't lose the authenticity of a conversation and the spontaneity of a conversation through over planning. And that's where a lot of podcasts can fall down, is that it just feels very sort of overly structured, and it's therefore not easy to listen to. And I think one thing that we've worked on and honed over the last 38 or so episodes, wherever we're up to now, is that actually we have these what we call conversational stepping stones. So they're topics that we're likely to cover, and you sort of you build some narrative around that, and sort of maybe have a thread going through them. But there's no rehearsal whatsoever, and actually you can go off on a tangent, and it's it's quite organic in that way, and it just leads to a much easier listen, and a much more compelling, I guess, performance by whoever's on the podcast. And I think again, that's been really sort of key to the success of it.
Fantastic. That's some great advice there, James, and advice I'll take away personally as well around it's one of the reasons it's really interesting to hear the authenticity element, that you're trying to get the balance between structure and the conversational style. So, and it's certainly an angle that I've tried to achieve with the live element of this, and hopefully it's working so far in the podcast that we've done. So just one last question really to round off, and I know that we sort of touched on this so far, but in terms of we've been through a very difficult period, not to understate it. Hopefully we're coming back out to some sort of normality as we move through the months this year. Where would you say the future lies for the CIM? It's really tough to plan ahead at the moment, above and beyond sort of month on month, but do you have any views as to the next 12, 24 months, 36 months? Where do the sort of aspirations and goals sit for the organization, or the marketing element of that? How do you see it?
No, absolutely. Well, I think that is the golden question, isn't it? What's the next 6 to 18 months going to look like? And without having any sort of crystal ball, I think people will, despite them thinking that they won't, they will spring back to quite a lot of normality, behavioural normalities that they exhibited. I very much hope that a lot of the consumption or overconsumption won't return, and I think that's something that is a real focus for us as a business, is to sort of try and really promote. And actually, Gemma Butler is one of the co-authors of Sustainable Marketing, which is a book recently out. And I think that is a trend that we're very much seeing, both from a, that's what people want going forward. So we're certainly facilitating that in lots of ways. But I think for us, it's about collaborations and communities. So, we're working more closely than ever with recruitment agencies, and particularly in particular Hays. So we're looking at the market. There's some scary statistics out from Hays at the moment around the percentage of marketers that are looking to change roles in the next 12 months, and it's basically everybody. Okay. So, there's been quite the sort of pent up demand, I think, and there's going to be a lot of people out there going for roles. So we're working very closely with partners like Hays and other recruitment agencies to really sort of bring relevant information to the audiences. Equally, we're working with other sort of specialists in fields such as the AFI. So we've got a series of courses with them that looks at video for marketers, and in fact I attended them, two of the three of them recently, and they're absolutely fantastic. I would say that. But it's about the prevalence of video in terms of communicating, brand storytelling, etc., and the need for marketers to really sort of understand the core skills to represent their brands sufficiently, in digital spheres. So I think collaboration, community, ongoing support is something which is a real value for us, and value for our audiences. And I guess it's just talking and keeping those sort of conversational channels open, because of in an uncertain world, that's where you draw sort of comfort and trust. I think so. That's something really important for us, but also from conversations and feedback that we're getting from our 250,000 followers, that's really important for them as well, and that'll sort of help sort of guide the way through an uncertain path.
Yeah, great. And that's come through, as a backbone to the whole conversation, really, is the engagement with your members, the listening to your members as part of that, a fundamental part of that, and then adapting as well as taking your own plans into consideration. So that's great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that draws us to a close, James, and I'd just like to say massive thanks. That was brilliant. So great to hear all the different elements we've discussed. Covered a lot of ground there, and just like to say big thanks for all your time, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you very much for having me on. That was good fun. Cheers.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.